To get into a conversation tonight, like I told you, we'll be focusing on the management of education transition. And in studio, I have Dr. Mark Matunga, who is an educationist. Karibu sana daktari.
Asante.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You know, let's begin with how you rate the reporting of junior secondary students who started reporting on Monday. There are those who would say there was a bit of confusion. How would you rate that reporting on Monday?
John, before I answer your question, allow me to, because this is my first time to come back on studio since the death of Magoa, who is a great patriot, a giant in the academia. And I just want to basically express and register my condolences with the family and Kenyans in the academic sector as well. May his soul rest in eternal peace. John, you've asked me a question that you are the one who should be answering, because I don't have a child who is in the transition. But in my assessment as an educationist, I think that the transition has been handled well. I know that parents are just about jittery, and so is everyone else when it comes to issues of change. But generally, the Ministry of Education, in my assessment, has done a great job in handling the transition, communicating the plan and the programs and how this needs to actually be done. I support the change of moving or retaining the junior secondary in primary school. That was not one of the best decisions that the Ministry of Education made, to actually build classrooms in secondary and want to actually transition, move class 6 or class 7 to high schools or secondary schools. That was, in my view, money that was in some way wasted. But again, the secondary schools can actually use those property in some other way. But the very fact that it was retained, junior secondary school was retained in the primary school, is, in my view, a great decision. It has helped in the transition. I think what parents are jittery about are issues like uniform, issues like who's going to be training, who's going to be teaching in the junior secondary school. I could hear some mamas around, is it the same principal or a head teacher that's actually going to be playing that role? But those are minor issues. The most important element here that I've been attempting to actually deal with for the last several years is what we call CBC, which I tend to disagree with what we have packaged as actually CBC. CBC is a curriculum. What we are dealing with here is an education system that actually internationally is called CBE, competency-based education, that is anchored or being fueled by a curriculum. So we cannot call a curriculum a system of education. And that's where we've gone wrong as a country. But again, that is not a serious issue. When every box vehicle is called a Nissan. Even if it's a Toyota, we still call it a Nissan. But be as it may, we call it CBC. And that is what is known. I think that the government has done a good job.
It has done a good job.
In the transition.
Let's talk about capacity, because that is also a question that is being raised, for example, because what the previous government was doing is to build classes in secondary schools to accommodate the junior secondary school. Now you have a situation where we've said there will continue being in primary school, but there are facilities really probably that they will need that are not available in primary schools. As an educationist, how do you propose the government handles the dicey situation?
No, I mean, you can talk of capacity in terms of infrastructure, which is what the previous regime was attempting to actually deal with by building those classrooms in secondary school. There's no such mysterious capacity that is needed for this. If a child or a learner was in grade 6, there were learners who are in grade 7 who have now moved to grade 8. Those are old learners in the old system. This learner will just basically move to occupy that class. And yes, you're talking about capacity. Capacity can be in the context of, equipment, can be in the context of infrastructure. That is the classroom, the space, which is not an issue. And that is why I was telling you that it was actually wrong for the government to actually made a decision to build those classrooms. Because right now what they are just basically classrooms. There's nothing so unique in a secondary school that a grade 7 learner or a junior secondary school learner would actually need. And some of that can actually be addressed through the use of technology. So I really don't think that there's any issue around what we call capacity. The room is still there. But you could also be talking about capacity from the point of view of the teacher readiness, which to me is the most important thing in the curriculum delivery. The teacher is the most important element, the most important person in this process.
Let's transition to the teacher. The government has announced that it is hiring 30,000 teachers. When you divide that by the number of schools we have, that is almost literally one teacher per school, for each school. The question being, again, the staffing, the teachers that are supposed to be doing this job, are they enough?
John, you know full well that there's no country on the planet that has enough teachers. So that is number one. And let's just agree that there's no country that has enough teachers. It's always a work in progress. We'll always be adding, we'll always be increasing that number or that ratio to actually come down to what is reasonable. In some cases, in some schools, it's manageable. In some schools, it's excess. So I really don't think that our teacher ratio should go in the context of, we have 30,000 schools and we have had 30,000 teachers. Let's not forget there were teachers there before. I'm referring to capacity from the point of view of the readiness of the teacher, the retooling of the teacher, because that to me is the most important thing. The teacher needs to be retooled continually, because in CBC, the student is really, or the learner, it's a learner-centered curriculum delivery approach. So the teacher is basically a facilitator. Before, it used to be that the teacher was actually the owner of the knowledge. In this case, in a CBC environment, we're basically guiding a learner to pursue a pathway of interest, of their competency, just so that they can actually mature in that area. So if you're in sports, you're in music, you're in other areas, and some people could actually excel in academia. So the teacher is basically a facilitator, guiding the learner to actually achieve their full potential in the context of teaching and learning. And so we should not be looking at the teacher capacity or the teacher-student ratio in the traditional way that we've always looked at it. Because if you look at it that way, then we will never even achieve anything close to what we think we should. It is changing the methodology, the approach or curriculum delivery, or the approach to facilitation of learning in a classroom. And that is basically what changes. And so once you change that and you re-engineer the teachers, the curriculum delivery to actually match that, we should be somewhere close to having a good ratio if we look at it in totality. But let's not look at the number of teachers vis-a-vis the number of students, and then the teacher in front of the students or in front of learners, telling them A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. Have you understood? Have you understood? No, that's not the way it's going to work.
All right. As we come to a close, the government has set the capitation at 15,000 per student. But there's always the dangers of delay in terms of disbursement of capitation. From where you sit as an educationist, probably get to paint the picture for us what it means to a student relying on this 15,000 shillings allocated per head to the student by government, the dangers of delayed disbursement.
Well, even before we come to disbursements, let's talk of the amount.
The amount, yes.
Obviously, the amount is not sufficient, as resources are always insufficient. So I think that the government needs to actually look into that. However, where we are right now, it is something to start with. It is something to work with. Much as it's not enough, we have something to start working with. But then when it comes to issues of delay, that is just basically a simple technical issue that the government actually needs to address. Education is the most important thing, in addition to oxygen and life. for any parent. I know that is what worries every Kenyan. I know all of us are education stakeholders. You are either a teacher or a parent or a guardian or a spectator, a cheerleader in the education space, because we want to actually see our children progress. We want to see our family members, our community members progress, especially the young ones. So it becomes a very personal, emotive issue. And when the government fails to actually remit that little money in and on time, it becomes a problem. And the reason I was just giving that background is that it is imperative that the government prioritizes this disbursement. But let us also remember that that little money that has been sent need to be put to proper use, because before we have misused that money. Absolutely. And I want to say something about Magoa even as I close.
Okay.
Magoa, I believe most Kenyans would understand that Magoa was a corruption-free guy. Magoa never tolerated corruption. He's one person, one human being that I've met on this planet that you cannot accuse of corruption. And I experienced one incident whereby I was going there with Google executives who I consult with, and Magoa actually had to deploy a vetting mechanism around me and my background before I could actually even step into that room to meet him, because he feared. I mean, he's Mark Matunga coming to my office to actually, compromise me in any way. And I'm joining that to the little money that we're complaining about that is little. When it gets to our school, let's put it to good use. Let it help the child for which it's been apportioned.
Absolutely. You agree, Dr. Mark Matunga is an authority. We'll call you back again here, because obviously there are issues that will keep coming up with the transition to junior secondary school, but of course also even in the management of the cadres below junior secondary schools, and of course the reintroduction again of these junior secondary students who are in private schools back to public schools. It'll be an interesting conversation moving forward.
Someone actually said it's only in this system where you get class 7 people going to secondary, while the class 8 is waiting to sit for their secondary school examination. Well, Mainz and Bayern Munich are going to be playing tonight, so this is the best place to be. I'm Regina Manyara.
Absolutely. Of course, after this, a bit of entertainment with the rave, but of course, we bring you the live match of Bayern Munich versus Mainz. That's a little bit later, because KBC is your true partner in sports. Have yourself a fantastic night. My name is John Jacob Kioria.